Hi, everybody. It's 3 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Daniel Medina with Investors Advantage. Investors Advantage is a financial planning and money management firm in Westlake Village. We focus on planning first, and we really do believe proof is in the planning. We're going to start out today by going over our website. For those of you who haven't been there, please make sure you visit. We do post our webinars in the webinar tab in the top right-hand corner. We post our upcoming and previous webinars, everything that we've done going back to March now. We also post all of John's interviews on the interviews page. He was most recently on TD's Ameritrade. We're posting that one this week. So make sure you check it out. We're always posting new things. We got a lot of things going on, and you don't want to miss it. And now I'm bringing on John Grace.
Thanks, Daniel. In fact, we've got a nice announcement we'll have at the end, but just kind of keeping our feet on the ground here and seeing what's going on and reading your perceptions. By the way, you're not crazy. So we're going to dive right in. If it is your experience that it appears that Wall Street is divorced from Main Street, I think that's true. So we'll look at that today in our material. And then our agenda is to look at how Wall Street is divorcing from Main Street. That happens from time to time. We think it's happening right now. And then we have a good friend of mine, David Gauntlet, principal with Gauntlet and Associates Law, who is an attorney that specializes in insurance claims or insurance coverage. So part of what we're trying to do is help you see around the corner in terms of that bus you do not identify until, unfortunately, it hits you upside your head. And if you're lucky, you get to survive to tell the story and deal with it. If you're not, you're done. But we want you to be more fortunate and be prepared for the bus, and don't just stare at your phone 24/7. Keep your eyes open. Make sure you're a wobblehead looking all around at everything. We don't want you to miss anything. Certainly, we want to be better prepared for the good, the bad, and the unforeseen. And I think we can do a better job of that. And then we'll open up for questions and answers because you guys raise great questions, and we'll do our best to provide you with substantial answers. So one of the things that the Larry Kudlow, who I happen to know, he won't remember me, but I'll always remember him, wants you to believe is that we're in the throes of a V-shaped recovery. And I'm going to contest that. We'll separate it because I think what we can begin to see is the distinctions between where there is a recovery and where there isn't. So let's look at starting out with a good quote from Jim Cramer. He says, the S&P's new highs are a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing about the hardships of millions of people on food stamps, or the millions about to be fired from service jobs, or the homeless, or the people who are just huddled at home waiting for the vaccine, which currently feels a lot like waiting for Godot. I think he capsulized exactly what's going on right now. And that was just on September, he made that statement earlier this month, and I think he's right on point. So when we look a little further, we can see that, by the way, year to date, I mean, every day you can't miss the news without the news declaring what a great market day it was. And part of the problem, and part of, I think, opportunity, part of the problem is that we're only looking at the nanosecond as opposed to the trend or even what's been going on for the year. So we want to take the opportunity to kind of help you put things in perspective, because if you just listen to the news and watch the headlines, it suggests that everything's coming up roses. It's happy days are here again. And for some, that is true. And for others, that is not true. So we've charted the Dow here, and it looks like the peak so far for the year was reached on February the 19th. And the bottom was reached around March 23rd so far. That seems to be the peak, the high point for 2020, and the low point for 2020 so far, looking at it from right now. And as you may recall, as we talked about, the losses from that high to the low, in some estimations were 30%, and some estimations it was 37%. Now, let's do the math right there just for a minute, because once we get to being down 40%, we need a gain of like 66% just to get back to even. So when my industry, the securities industry, famously tells you stocks for the long haul, hold and hold, sit and take it, I'm going to say, no, you can do a better job if you see what happened. If you don't see what happened and you're just looking at what the account did in the last quarter, you won't see the peak in the valley, because being down 37%, suppose it doesn't come back during your lifetime, or suppose it's more severe than that. So we're suggesting that you go back and look to see where did your account peak and what happened around the 23rd, of March, because some of my neighbors looked like they were going to cry. Apparently their accounts were down more than that, and they were depressed as no get out. But as you can see, there's been pretty much of a V-shaped recovery with the Dow as of the 22nd Friday. Now let's look at the S&P. And again, to keep things in perspective, the Dow year to date is off 0.72. That's a little over 70 basis points, 0.72% is off, is in negative territory. That's almost hard to fathom, except that's just the reality. The S&P is up about 7.67. These are all numbers from 1/1/20 through today, actually. Okay, so off almost 1% with the Dow, up almost 7.7% with the S&P. And then when we look at the NASDAQ, we see that it's up a whopping 30%. So that one has been rocking and rolling. But this also helps you see the disconnect. I mean, the Dow, that's the top 30. The S&P are the 500 largest companies, but the NASDAQ is running away with all the goods, okay? So either you're in NASDAQ or you haven't done so well. And then when we look at the NASDAQ as a recovery, we see that it looks something like, comparing the Dow, all three. So the blue, again, is the Dow, the purple is the S&P, and the red is the NASDAQ. You can see that we're off to the races, it would appear, all over the place. So, but we believe that it's not about the prediction. It's far more about the preparation. And whereas everybody wants to enjoy and participate in a 50% gain, no one wants to participate, nor will they enjoy a 50% loss. And that's part of the equation that we think it's our responsibility to prepare people for, because I frankly believe that either of those cases could be made very strongly, but it's the losses that people will not forget forever, okay? So we want you prepared better for the good, the bad, and the unforeseen, and to go back to see how your losses were, because if you had an account, for example, where the market was off 30 to 37%, but your account, well, let's say was off 7 to 15%, you might say, hey, this isn't so bad. I can bounce back from, let's see, say even a 20% loss is a 25% gain to get back even. Because we get past 30, now it gets to be more like 50%. And when we get to 40, it's 66%. And when we get to 50% loss, it's 100%. So that you can just see that negative is a big eraser, kind of like doing well in school, getting B's and A's, and you get one D or an F, and it just destroys your report card. So most of us don't learn from the past, and we want all of us to pay attention to the past, because we think it does have a tendency, maybe not to repeat itself, but get pretty close in a very good ride. Now, good old Donald Trump, our president, said that we have the strongest economy in the world. This was on ABC News. As measured by real GDP, the U.S. economy contracted, however, at a record-breaking 32.9% last quarter. So sometimes there are agendas that one has to pay attention to, because clearly if I'm president, I want you to believe that I'm the best thing since sliced bread, and you should reelect me for as long as I'm alive. You, on the other hand, I think need to pay more attention under the hood to see if what I'm saying is the truth. I love what Reagan used to say, trust but verify. So let's not just take whatever someone's saying at face value. Let's look a little bit closer under the hood to see, do we have an engine? Is it a 4-cylinder engine? Is it an 8-cylinder engine? You were sold that it was a 16-cylinder engine, and you find out it's not quite that. I think you want to know about that in advance. And then, so nearly 33%, and roughly 1 out of 10 workers can't find a job in America these days. And about 1 in 5 Americans who rent homes are at risk of eviction by the end of the next month, September. By the way, September, when we go back to look to see if you asked the question, which month was the worst month of the year most consistently, it happens to be September, all right? I don't know if this one's going to do what it typically does, but I'm just saying, don't just drink the Kool-Aid and think everything's just fine. Okay, so now let's look at globalization, because that's one of the things that many folks would like to believe we need to end. And I have to remind people that, I mean, let's see what's going on here. We're all drinking the same water, we're breathing the same air, we used to fly the same airplane, so we're really pretty much all doing the same thing at the same time, some better than most, but if we're talking about making the conditions for all boats to rise on a rising sea, then that means we should be looking at the details. So sometimes we get myopic and we miss the big picture. We look to internationals or other countries to see what's going on. And in fact, in October of 2018, I happened to be at a conference in Austin, Texas, and I will never forget the IMF October 2018 saying winter is coming. It was a metaphor. And what attracted my attention was that I noticed every time they had a quote in terms of what they expected gross domestic product to do in the world, they kept lowering the expectations. So some people are saying, everything's fine, only, and the IMF I have found to be a pretty good source of looking at information that has no political bent. Clearly, they're looking at the world. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not independent. They're looking at the world. And as we look at the world, here's what we're seeing. Now, I like to ask this question. If you look at this chart, you see that we're measuring Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And as we've discussed in this webinar, most people aren't cognizant of the fact that the Japanese stock market, they call it the Nikkei 225, it's the equivalent of our S&P 500, seems to have peaked around year-end 1989 at 39,000. The first leg down was from 39,000 to 10,000. The second leg down in the span of 30 months was to 7,000. So in 30 months, that's a decline of 80%. 80% in 30 months. That couldn't happen here, right? It has before, couldn't happen again, right? I'm saying I think it absolutely could happen again, and we should be prepared for it. Get ready for it. Don't be afraid of it. What programs are we going to be put in place to keep your assets from being handed to you, as opposed to saying, sorry, stocks for the long haul. By the way, a year later, the Japanese real estate market followed the same example with the stock market, delayed by a year, where it dropped 70%. And what I love to ask is what I call a trick question: which one has come back to even? We don't study this, so nobody knows the answer, but I'm trying to kind of guide people by asking which one has come back to even. And the answer is D, neither of the above. Neither the stock market in Japan nor the real estate market in Japan has gotten back to its highs of 1989 as far as the stock market is concerned, 1990, 91 as far as the Japanese real estate market is concerned. I'm just suggesting that if events like that has happened with what has been the second largest gross domestic product country in the world, it could happen here. And if we look further, we see the similar parallels with other Asian countries. But notice the thing that you can see, I mean, this is looking at Nikkei.com, but the spending wave is down. And now, according to Harry Dent, I was speaking to him, he's president of our research team, Dent Research, it's down forever, forever. No one can see the future. But think of it this way, in a way that I think makes all the sense in the world. Globally, we now have more people 65 and older than 5 and younger. We've never been here before. Never. So when people say, oh, it's just going to bounce back, well, I hope that's true, but I'm going to suggest that you might look at it as though it might be false and, make some other plans. Don't just believe the bounce is going to be so terrific. You can see that South Korea followed in 2008, plateaued into 2018, and then guess what? Falls forever. Taiwan is the last to plateau. Its plateau looks around 2010, and will continue through 2023 before, guess what? Declining forever. Now, we talked about the birth rates in terms of everybody's older than they've ever been before, or certainly on a global basis. That's not changing. And I don't know, we just looked to see what the birth rates look like in the US of A after COVID. A year from now, after COVID, it looks like our birth rates will be down between 300 and 500,000 less births during the same time as a year ago. So the US, along with the world, for the most part, we're not having the children that we used to have in the same numbers that we used to. And wait, there's more. Contrary to popular belief, life expectancy in the US of A is in decline. The rest of the world seems to be north of 80. Our average life expectancy is short of 80, okay? That comes from the US Census Bureau. And it seems to be that the biggest piece to the puzzle is that we don't have good healthcare for everyone. Great healthcare for the rich, but not so much for everyone else. So it's like we're not taking care of our poor people, which is dragging more people into dying and lowering the averages. So you have like two groups. The life expectancy for those with insurance and resources is expanding. The expectancy for those with no insurance and no resources is declining. But there are more decliners than the ones who are healthy with money and insurance. There are more of the decliners, so it's bringing the averages down. And yet, by the way, this is interesting. When we look at countries like Japan and the other developed countries, the US of A tends to have the youngest population by comparison. And I'm going to submit to you that the primary reason for that happens to be the fact that it is Asians that are the fastest growing ethnic group in the US of A. So thankfully, the Asians are doing what the rest of us won't do, and that's have any more kids. And this comes from Pew Research Center in the United States data. Okay, so let me give you this little last update. This is just as of Monday with the Wall Street Journal. Again, looking at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, saying that the pandemic and the resulting economic shutdowns have led to the expectation that global output will fall about 5% this year. 5%, that's a big number. And it's larger than what we saw in 2008 during the financial crisis. It also led to 400 million jobs lost worldwide, according to the International Labor Organization, with 12 million of those jobs in the US alone. So a 12% decline in output globally. You're just not hearing about that in our news cycles, but it helps, I think, give you a bigger picture as to what's really going on in the world. And much of this is not political at all. It's just what happens at this particular time, given the circumstances that we are dealing with. So let's see it as it is and see how we can do the best we possibly can. But let's not put our heads in the sand, hoping that things will get better, revealing some very dear parts to wave in the wind and possibly get hurt very badly. So speaking of avoiding being hurt very badly, I'm going to ask David Gauntlet to pick up from here. And again, he is the principal with Gauntlet Associates Law, and their specialty is insurance coverage. And in particular, what struck me about David's work is preparation relative to when you think you have a viable claim with your carrier, whether it's regarding your homeowners or it's regarding your health, and the insurance company wants to argue with you and make you go through hell and make sure that you die sooner than you could just because of you would have because of the stress in dealing with the insurance company you thought were paid to take on this risk. So David, I think you can take it from there, please. Bring it up to speed. And by the way, what I'm suggesting, folks, is that we all have some people in a Rolodex that we might not need to contact, but we might want to if we have to. And certainly would be advantageous to have some relationship with some folks we think who would be on our side to carry us across the finish line so we can make sure that particularly these insurance carriers follow through on the promises that they made. Take it from there, please, David.
Hello.
There we go.
Okay. Hi, this is David Gauntlet. Can you catch me now?
Yes, you're doing great.
Okay. All right. Thanks. There are some PowerPoints. I'm now moving to number 1. And what I'm going to focus on is, and if we can move, yeah, there we go. If we can focus on what's going on in the marketplace right now. I'm not going to be talking about the PowerPoint as much as using it as background. It's interesting that there are estimates from the folks that track what's going on in the insurance industry that anticipate $25 billion of loss for COVID-19 pandemic losses. Now, if you listen to what the insurance carriers are telling you, they're telling you there's no coverage for business interruption losses. Yet they're claiming that that's their market, the market exposure is at that level. And right now, the catastrophic loss estimates are only $20 million on top of that amount for the hurricanes that are envisioned to be a very high level of penetration. And of course, we have what's going on in Louisiana right now. So the carriers in their heart of hearts understand that there's exposure because they have real issues to providing coverage for business interruption losses that they share with their reinsurers, they share internally, but their public face is one that says there's no possibility of real coverage for those claims. Typical kinds of arguments that are made about why there's no coverage for business interruption loss, and I'll move on to the next slide now, tend to be focused on the view that there's this exclusion, the ISO, Insurance Service Office exclusion in 2006 for viruses. And if you read it, it says it excludes coverage for bacteria, viruses, or other microorganisms. If you have a high school biology student, they'll tell you that viruses are not living things, and they're certainly not microorganisms. And so that whole exclusion, which appears to be grafted on an earlier mold exclusion, may not be enforceable. So I wrote an article called The Emperor Has No Clothes regarding COVID-19 that's on LinkedIn and our website. And I'd invite you to take a look at where the carriers may have issues that they're not willing to fess up to. What is a consequence of this higher level of insurer penetration claims? Well, there is going to be a harder market. And so far, there have been increases in the amount of monies you have to expend to get coverage. Marsh, one of the biggest broker in the country, talked about a 19% upcharge in commercial insurance rates in the second quarter, and a further 14% increase on top of that for the last 3 months. D&O, directors and officers premiums, up 59% in the second quarter. But it's interesting, there's a lot of money flowing in investment capital to both the reinsurance and the insurance market, because the perception is there will be winners and losers in insurance companies, and many of them will take advantage of the purported reasons that there appears to be a hard market, get capital, and be in a position to address the issues that are now occurring in a problematic way. So what else is going on out there besides the COVID cases? On August 19th, we had a case before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is referenced there. The actual citation is 2020 Appellate Lexus 26328. And it's kind of typical of a carrier reaction to a lawsuit where the carrier took the position that they did not owe a duty to defend a claim. Our client was a plaintiff, My Choice, a software company, suing parties that it believed had engaged in wrongful tortious behavior regarding its business. And a counterclaim came back in state court against them, asserting defamation, that what the plaintiff said about them was untrue. That claim triggered coverage under a commercial general liability policy issued by Travelers. And Travelers did agree to defend and to pay for the defense counsel. But after the defense started, the plaintiff had, in their view, the temerity, as part of the protection of its rights, to pursue the same parties that were suing it in a counterclaim for trade secret misappropriation, which came to light after they did further investigation. And indeed, they got the police involved, and there was a raid and ultimately a settlement by the parties who were sued initially. Travelers' response was that that activity in amending the complaint triggered an exclusion for intellectual property, even though it's a liability policy, even though there were no claims for intellectual property violations against the insured, because an intellectual property claim was asserted by the insured, that was enough to vitiate all the insurance. And they decided that that result flowed from the mere fact that they used the word suit in their exclusion. And they said the suit means the case number as associated with the whole lawsuit. The Ninth Circuit thought that was much too narrow a construction, and it didn't give any idea to an insured layperson as to what the exposure was to buying a policy of that kind. And I would caution any companies that buy insurance to be very sensitive to the content of exclusions, and to make sure your broker is either knowledgeable about new exclusions that pop up, or at least point out that they exist so some time can be taken. I also do a fair amount of employment insurance coverage, and one of the big banes of being in California is the number of cases that have arisen for employment claims, including things like wage and hour litigation, et cetera. And I think it's important when you're looking at what insurance may apply, that all the various silos that are possible places to look for help in addressing insurance coverage be accessed. And those include EPLI, which is Employment Practices Liability Insurance, which you have to specially purchase, errors and admissions insurance, directors and office insurance, which are not what a lot of small businesses typically secure, but makes sense to purchase in this context, as well as the more traditional commercial liability, the slip and fall policy. The problem with the slip and fall style policy for those claims is it typically only covers non-employment related claims because there's an employment practices exclusion. But if you read it very carefully, the one tort, which is also covered by the CGL policy that it doesn't address, is invasion of privacy claims. And it's arguable that some of those may slip through the cracks. And so it's always important to look at every policy and clarify the nature of liability. EBL is benefits liability, and sometimes the benefits available to an employee can be impacted by the alleged conduct of an employer that can trigger coverage under that policy. Homeowners, PULP, the personal umbrella liability policy, the best investment in America. Everyone should have an umbrella policy. I've used it to get coverage for business disputes, for loss firm separations, for major accident cases. It covers things like invasion of privacy, as well as defamation claims, in addition to the more traditional bodily injury property damage coverage. And so we should be now at slide 5, which deals with these kinds of claims. The importance of those kinds of policies is they provide over coverage at the top and can make a big difference in what's available. So a lot of what I do as a coverage attorney is kind of strategic thinking, because when I see coverage in a lawsuit, I need to think not only about whether it will help if I focus on a particular element of claim to get coverage, but how it's going to affect the liability and the underlying action if we take a particular approach, whether the damages could be covered, whether a settlement could be covered, and also the recoverability of the affirmative claims that may arise if they're involved in the same lawsuit. We have spent a lot of time trying to recover monies that have been incurred for insurers that owe a defense, but also have been held to owe the cost of pursuing affirmative claims. So in that same lawsuit, My Choice one, when we go back to the district court, we're going to be asking for the prosecution fees that were incurred in suing for trade secret misappropriation, because they're defensive of the suit for defamation. They're one and part of the same case, and we'll be pushing back on those kinds of issues. Next slide. So it's interesting, there's a lot of jurisdictions outside of California that care only to look at the policy language and the complaint language. That's not true of California and a number of jurisdictions, about 20 of them nationally. They look at more. And if you think of the facts that are pertinent as broken into like an iceberg with up to 90% below the water and 10% above, most of the facts that matter are the ones that are not evident in the complaint. And you can look at, in California, the facts that are alleged, inferences from those facts, the facts that come to light in what's called extrinsic evidence, which is facts that come forward when you litigate the case in discovery, motion activity, inferences on those, and facts that evidence of potential for amendment of the complaint. That's a pretty broad spectrum of facts. And it's often why, in my experience, over 75% of the denial letters that I've reviewed are bad, not worth paper they're written on, and need to be challenged. And that is probably a little less so in what I call personal lines claims, homeowners and health, because in those instances, the claims representative charged with overseeing whether there's coverage or not are more familiar with the policy language and the fact scenarios. But when you get into business tort claims, especially intellectual property claims or any kind of more exotic employment claims, their comfort zone about what to say, when, and how is not as strong as it should be. 7, policy language makes a difference. It makes a huge difference, and we're at slide 7 now, as to what facts are pertinent and what the policy language changes. Policies differ markedly, and it's very important to take a look at it. We had a case involving employment practices liability insurance that's ongoing, and there was a termination of an employee by an employer. After the termination, the employer seeks insurance coverage for employment practices liability insurance. Broker procures a policy, and it has a retroactive date, that is a date when the events have to occur first. And that date was the same date as the purchase of the policy, months after the date of the termination. The carrier's response was that retroactive date precluded any possible coverage. But it failed to note that there was an endorsement to the policy that gave full prior acts coverage, which they had ignored and not read. And when that endorsement was taken into account, it trumped the retroactive date in the policy. And if you hadn't read the endorsements in light of their interaction with and relationship to the policy, that could have been missed. And so now that matter is going to have a different view going forward. And kudos to the broker for getting the prior acts coverage in place in that policy. Very important to have a proactive insurance broker that knows how to get the best kind of coverage in the market. Another area where that's particularly important right now is some of you may have homes that are in fire zones, and there's lots of challenges to procure coverage where carriers are often deciding not to renew because of their concerns about the exposure in that context. Sometimes you have to go to brokers who have connections outside traditional markets, even to London-based markets, to get a better opportunity in that space. Just because there is no case that has addressed a particular problem doesn't mean there may not be a solution in challenging what a carrier says is the interpretation it's adopting. Insurance recovery attorneys are always very open to the notion that they may have to make new law in order to get coverage benefits. Back in the last meltdown around the time of Charles Keating, one of my first big tasks was to help get coverage for members of S&L organizations that were involved in claims against them brought by unhappy depositors who believed that they'd been ripped off by the institution. The folks like Charles Keating, who were running the organizations, were taking most of the proceeds of the directors and officers policy for their benefit. Our team looked at a workers' compensation policy and found employers' liability coverage, which was triggered because there were emotional distress claims by unhappy investors who were extremely unhappy at having lost all their money. And we were able to get coverage for those mid-level executives that was unlimited in character by virtue of looking at a different place than everybody else had been looking up to this point in time. So when is it that it would make sense to get a policyholder company involved? Well, our motto is when the insurer says no, throw down the gauntlet, which is us. Or when there's a counterclaim, like the situation I noted in the My Choice case. Or when there's what I call buried treasure. Buried treasure is when the carrier said no, and it's wrong. And you can now go back and revisit that no. From the date of the no going forward, you could have a right to get prejudgment interest, 10% return, on the money you paid to lawyers, settlements, indemnity, so long as the statute of limitations hasn't expired. That is typically 4 years in California from the date the underlying lawsuit is completely over. So cases where the carrier denied a defense 6, 7, 8 years ago could still be fodder. And again, revisiting whether those denials are good creates a new asset. Our firm has been extremely busy since COVID because of work we're doing for a number of companies in COVID insurance coverage claims. Many of them are restaurants or caterers or distributors and manufacturers whose business has been affected adversely. And I tell them all, the check is not in the mail, but we're tracking what's happening out there. And like just yesterday, there was a case in Missouri in federal court where the court did not allow dismissal of a case, claiming that a suit by various hairdressers for their losses might be viable enough to proceed beyond a motion brought by the carrier. Why there is or is not coverage is something that'll be very fact dependent in each case and will require investigation. If you don't understand what your policy covers, maybe the best time to ask is before you buy it. I find that the incredible shrinking commercial liability policy is often best supplemented by a media policy and a cyber policy, often conjoined in the same form now, because when people work remotely, the possibility of hacking and issues regarding cyber is going to be much more than it used to be. And media policies cover virtually any kind of business tort except patent, antitrust, and trade secret misappropriation. And so that's a large range of kind of false advertising, defamation claims, trademark, copyright claims that businesses who are actively involved in promoting their businesses over the internet may find themselves subject to. Again, if your policy is up for renewal and you think that maybe it doesn't provide the best coverage, we help kind of womb to tomb structure insurance policies, working with knowledgeable brokers, dealing with claims that are made during the process. And if the worst happens, it looks like the only asset a company has is its insurance policy to forestall a bankruptcy or being belly up in some kind of assignment to the benefit of creditors, we can look at the insurance asset and see if that will make a difference for an individual insured. That's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. For everyone, there's a question and answer button at the bottom of your, or somewhere on your menu bar. There's also a chat button. Either way, you can send me a message and I'll make sure it gets asked. First question for you, John. Which sector of the stock market is most risky?
Which sector of the stock market is most risky? I would say the one that's the winning area, that's NASDAQ right now. I mean, that's where all the gains are. That's where a lot of excitement is. That's where a lot of gamers seem to be taking their checks, and you know, they can't go to the track. They're not betting on the horses like they used to. Can't go to Vegas, so they're betting on the stock market. And we've seen a lot of millennials kind of come into the market with little money, and that might be what's helping the separation as far as the NASDAQ is concerned. But it's these, you know, is it the Apple, Alphabet, Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft. They're driving this market, and for me, that's kind of scary because of the lack of volume. In other words, all of the gains are going to really the top 5 or 10 stocks. This is very similar to what happened back in 2000. It was a different list of 5 stocks, but it was the NASDAQ that was running away with all of the chips, and nobody else was participating. That's just not a good sign, because there are too few stocks participating in those kinds of gains. I don't think it's sustainable. So I would say certainly tech stocks would be at the top of the list. Small caps would probably be right under that for my choice.
Excellent. David, next question for you. Can I just hire my family attorney to represent me in some kind of claim?
Well, the difficulty is the family attorney probably doesn't know much about coverage law. I guarantee you, if a family lawyer had not had experience with reviewing the various coverage provisions, didn't know the legal principles regarding coverage, he could be pretty much manipulated by the claims representatives and coverage attorneys the carrier hires. So as an example, when we tendered this claim for employment practices liability insurance, the initial reaction of the insurer was, for 20 years, no one has ever told me that my provision for retroactive dates being the same as the inception of the policy is ambiguous, or that are in any way could give rise to coverage for a claim before the contract arose. And unless you knew the interaction between a later endorsement, what courts had said about why that was legally more effective, and how they had addressed the implications of a policy application that asked you if you expected a claim to roll, that could be missed. And so it's easy to be kind of bamboozled and misled if this is not an area where you practice day in and day out, because there's a lot of special rules in insurance coverage, like the ones about the iceberg, that are not intuitively obvious, that you need to know the case law. Most of our cases are 90% law, 10% facts. So it's a very law-intensive area of practice.
Good answer. Dave, why is the declaration page so important?
Well, that's the actual manuscript part of an insurance policy, where the particular nature of what the deal is that the insurance policy offers is set forth. And so it's going to be the one that's different. The policy period will be there. If it's a claims made and reported policy like an EPLI policy, that's where the presence of a continuity or a retroactive date will be recited. And the coverages like personal injury, advertising injury, in addition to bodily injury and property damage, will be recited, as well as the particular forms that are part of the policy. Think of a policy as a direction to some minimum wage employees to put a bunch of numbered forms together, slap them in one sort of form, and grow them together. And the big problem is that once you get your original policy, you'll never see it again. Each year, they're only going to send you endorsements. So 90% of the companies in America don't even know what their insurance is, because they have to look back 5 years to the original form, see how they were amended by endorsements that they just got each year, to even know what the insurance policy says.
Okay, good. That's an intense answer. John, If Biden gets elected, won't that cause the market to go down?
Well, I mean, probably not. In fact, I think it was that Bill Clinton had a balanced budget. So, I mean, what I'm saying is, everyone likes to believe, and maybe rightfully so, that the Republicans are the business-oriented part of the country, politics, and so they would do a better job of making the economy expand and grow. It just so happens that the opposite is what we see. The stock market in particular so far has done better under Democratic leadership than it has under Republican leadership, and by a pretty good margin. So I would say don't be afraid of the Biden becoming president.
Follow-up question to that, will the Democrats raise taxes?
Well, I hope so. And please understand, it has nothing to do with the political party. The governments are not getting enough money to do all the things we want them to do, okay? It's just not happening. And when people complain about taxes, I certainly like to remind them that if you were making $200,000 when Reagan was in office, 1982, as a household income, your federal tax bracket alone was 70%. Nobody remembers that. So when people complain about the taxes today, I'm like, choose. Which do you prefer? Where they used to be or where they are now? Both of them got kind of wonky. Okay, that might have been too high. I submit to you, this is too low. So I think the taxes have to be raised. And I wouldn't blame the Democrats for that. I think that's the responsibility of good government. You want to balance the budget. And right now, the budget is woefully out of whack. And I also would say, well, some people would say, okay, well, that's going to be bad for the market. That might be offset in the case that we see more work being done with other countries. Right now, I'm not sure we're on everybody's good list. But if the Biden administration is in an environment where they are more friendly to other countries, there might be more business or more collaboration, and that might make for more compensation and more growth. And by the way, if they are successful at actually tackling the infrastructure, that's huge, not just for the manufacturing companies or the builders, the construction folks, right? But the employees in terms of having really good paying jobs, not just looking at it from the standpoint that unemployment is down, but nobody's recognizing that the job you had was the best job you had. The one you have now is a fraction of the one you had. So while you're employed, it's a part-time kind of a gig. You're last hired, first fired. You're not making the same kind of compensation that you really need to make your personal economy work and allow you to live well and also invest well.
Thank you. Next question for you, David. What is an insurance rider? Any additional risk using a rider versus coverage in a policy without a rider?
Well, the rider becomes part of the policy like an endorsement does. So you need to know how it changes the coverage. And the case law suggests that the latest manifestation of intent, which is often a rider and an endorsement, can control over earlier inconsistencies. So it may be that everything you thought you had is implicated adversely by the rider. So you have to pay great attention to how riders revisit what the insurance purports to provide.
Okay, next question for you, David, and I believe that's our last one. When should someone contact an attorney about an insurance claim, and what's your retainer?
Well, we like to do womb to tomb, from the structuring of the insurance to when a claim is asserted. If you're planning to bring a lawsuit, I would suggest that the best way to ensure insurance benefits is to be the best insured company in America before you sue, because the likelihood is you may get a counterclaim. And if you have coverage for the anticipated counterclaim in place, you're going to be way ahead of the game. So also, you want to make sure you don't miss tender times. If you have a claims made and reported policy and you're late, you could vitiate all coverage. And if you're late in giving notice of a lawsuit or a claim, you may lose what are called pre-tender, pre-notice fees, and that can be costly. So I think people underutilize insurance counsel because they don't realize that they're an integral part. I have an article called Savvy, which is designed to show the interaction between how litigators and coverage attorneys are best rolled together so that they can enhance each other's benefits to all. My retainer depends on the nature of the case. I had one that was $1,500 for a nice woman whose husband went up and hit a tree in Yosemite with an RV he rented. And the rental car company wanted the difference between the deductible and the cost to the RV. Turns out that you can't subrogate against your own insured for damages. And if it's purportedly the carrier who's chasing them, that the rental car company sold them, you don't sell a pig in a poke policy and expect to be able to enforce it when you told people that would cover your RV. Either way, it's a bad result. It was pretty straightforward. But that was the kind of matter that I could work with a younger attorney and handle. Other cases can require more. I have a case where I'm representing a law school is being sued because the students can't see their professors and touch them live. They want a rebate on tuition. I had to get involved in directors and officers policies and errors and omissions policy. That was like a 10K retainer. So it depends on the nature of it. But our average price point for our talent's about $300 an hour as you look at the total group of professionals we do to apply to a particular problem.
One more question, actually. Is there a specific percentage of basic insurance coverage that an umbrella policy should reach?
Well, an umbrella, a personal umbrella, a PULP, P-U-L-P, will cover, bullying by your child on the internet, and it'll cover anything that's not a business activity. If you have business activities that you're operating out at home and you don't have coverage for your business, or you are the business, let's say it's this, I call it the Steve Jobs in his garage coverage, what you need is something like a media liability cyber policy that's freestanding, as well as, then they usually integrate commercial liability. So you need a business policy when your business is conducted at home, because a standard umbrella PULP policy only covers non-business activities. They're both important, but the business is more critical for a lot of folks that are actually operating out of their residences.
And we would usually recommend $1 million for an umbrella policy.
Well, I think that's the minimum. I think a couple would be good. Remember, you have unlimited defense fees in a personal umbrella policy, which is great, but that covers settlements and indemnity. And the larger the amount, the more in terror you can place parties that know that you have lots of money to spend on defense fees. You can also arrange to have some of the money be what's called outside of limits. So you can only spend it on defense fees, which really scares the plaintiffs, because now they know you have a great fund that's not useful to pay any damages they want, but just to beat them up in a lawsuit. That causes them great consternation.
Good answer. All right, John, what do we got going on next week?
Well, I don't know. We probably ought to talk about what's next. And, we're going to look at the pros and the cons. We'll look at both sides of the equation from the standpoint of how the economy can become stronger and what we see as clouds on the horizon. We want you to see the whole picture. So that way you're not, you don't wake up to shock and awe and you're woefully unprepared. So we like to look at both sides of the equation, and then we might even come to a conclusion as to where we think the odds are, because so many, we're not economists, but so many pundits are good at saying, well, on the one hand, on the other hand, and you're kind of looking at them going, well, you're the smart person who studied all this. Don't you have an opinion? And they don't offer one. We'll have an opinion. We try to do that because we think that's more forthright and more helpful than just trying to make it so balanced that you feel like you're left down the middle of the road. You're going to get hit on either side. The other part is that apparently, thanks to our great audience here, Daniel and I are kind of taking our act on the road. We're going to be hosting a radio show with Voice America. I think Daniel's got some details there. And it'll be on Wednesdays, interestingly enough. The day is the same. It'll be at noon as opposed to 3 o'clock. And that'll start on September 9th. So we'll be very interested if when we come together again in a week, to the extent of what would you like for us to cover, if you have any ideas, what worries you, because as I say, you have really given us the material to go out and look at, okay, here's what we can address. Well, how can we bring in someone like a David, for example, to say, hey, look, working out of your home, you might need a separate policy for that just to cover your assets. That might be a smart play. But again, we want to be prepared for these events, as opposed to everything so unprecedented and you're totally stressed out because it seems like you can't keep your eye on the ball, let alone stay ahead of the ball. We got to stay on the ball and ahead of the ball everywhere we possibly can. And our lights on. Okay.
Excellent. And we'll actually be sending out information for the show as we get closer to it. It's going to be on Voice America website, and it can be streamed live directly there.
And we'll have time. It'll be open for Q&A as well.
Yeah.
Live.
Yeah.
So thank you, David Gauntlett. Thank you so much. I thought you put a lot of meat on that bone, and we get a sense for some of those things that we might have to be prepared for, whether or not it's a future homeowner's claim or a COVID-19 claim, or as I say, how can we have some folks in our Rolodex that we maybe not want to call, but know that we can, and you already have a relationship with them so that it's more comfortable in the event they need to be hired. And I think the hourly and the retainer numbers, best I can tell, seems to be market friendly. So you're in the ballpark.
Thanks very much. And I just let people know that last year was a lot of floods and leaks and theft claims, and we do handle that kind of stuff too, as well as the things that I mentioned.
Well, and on that note, let me say something we covered at one of our webinars, which talked about how, and this was a study out of UCLA just November, that suggested the whole West Coast needs to be prepared for more fires and more floods.
Yeah.
And then they picked up a picture from, I guess, the Sacramento Bee, where, Leland Stanford was being inaugurated, but to get to the place for him to be inaugurated, he had to be rowed in a boat. Suggesting that, yes, this is not such an anomaly as you might think it is. It's just been a while since we've had those kind of floods, but be prepared.
Absolutely. Thanks to all.
Thank
Bye.
you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye for now. Stay warm, stay cool, and stay away from COVID.
Bye.